what I want to start with you, Bill, is just, I mean, assume that and ask, where are we now in terms of cloud computing?
Yeah, I think it feels like, I've been certainly in the cloud services world for about 10 or 15 years. It feels like we've just reached the point this year, heading into 2016, where cloud adoption is what we call very, very professional. And by that I mean companies who are failing to embrace cloud are going out of business. Companies who are embracing cloud are making a pile of money. And the main providers of cloud services are now reaching valuations that are exceeding tens of billions of dollars. So it feels like, yeah, we've gone from this is an interesting technology to, if you're not taking advantage of this technology, you could go out of business and or become very successful. So it's the new era.
Are there still companies that, I mean, user companies that are avoiding the cloud in any real, aside from, you know, a Google or someone who could not possibly operate, you know, within a hosted infrastructure? I mean, are there still companies that are pushing against it?
I would say, if you say today that really only 5% of workloads are now in the public cloud, therefore there's 95% of workloads that are still sitting in VMs that are in the private cloud or in, you know, on-premise environments. So there's a long, long way to go. And from an enterprise level, you know, in terms of denial, I'd say, yeah, there's absolutely swathes of companies that still are firmly bedded in the fact that even if they do embrace the cloud, it's going to be something that they do over a period of 5-10 years and are sort of daily being overtaken by events rather than being, you know, proactive in their adoption of it.
Okay, yeah, so I might be guilty of saying cloud and thinking public and hosted on Amazon or somewhere. But yeah, there's also, like you said, there's this hybrid, private sort of story. I mean, is the state of affairs there differently? I mean, broadly defined, what, you know, do you have a sense of how many workloads are in a, let's call it a private cloud environment?
Yeah, maybe slightly more. So maybe something like 10% of workloads are now in what you call a fully automated private cloud, with perhaps 5% in the public cloud. And, you know, I think what we're seeing is companies are realizing, look, public cloud is going to be part of your future, and to run workloads in a public cloud that is entirely incompatible with your existing private cloud or your on-premise environment is death. You're going to have to ensure that there's compatibility and tight integration between those two environments. Now, the problem with that statement is it sends clients to sleep in about 5 seconds. You talk about the importance of integration and compatibility, and literally people are snoozing. But you talk to any client that's 5 years into the journey into the public cloud, and they sort of start nodding vigorously and saying, absolutely, you know, we are in such pain around trying to extend our network into the cloud, about trying to maintain compliance, around trying to have security and encapsulate the apps that we put in the public cloud. So, you know, the benefits of agility are immense, but if you fail to ensure it's properly integrated with your existing environment, then really quickly things go badly wrong for people.
So what has to happen? I mean, what has to happen? Are there technological things that have to happen before companies look at this and go, oh my God, you know, this is the thing. This is what we've been looking for. Is it an education thing? Like, they're still thinking the primary value is buying less hardware. Like, what's the what's the inflection point that's going to make companies kind of just, you know, go crazy?
It's a good point. We're fortunate to work with, you know, hundreds of thousands of clients, and we watch them go through the phases of, you know, early successes from embracing the public cloud, agility gains from being able to do test and dev quickly or whip an application up quickly, and then this massive cliff of disillusionment as clients, you know, realize that they can't scale up in the public cloud because the integration challenges of extending their networks, of maintaining compliance and getting security, and so there's a period of disillusionment. And in that dark moment, the systems integrators will appear with an olive branch saying, for $5 million, all these problems can go away. And the projects are always called Project Matrix. For some reason, they always end up being called Project Matrix. There's a $5 million systems integration engagement exercise that, of course, fails. And then clients say, well, how can we move forward from this point? And then, you know, the other observation I'd make is, within client organizations, the silent death group are the networking engineers. And the compute guys, the storage guys, the management people, the developers, the operations team are all charging into the public cloud with great enthusiasm. But actually, the network engineers within the enterprise control the destiny of and whether you will or not be successful currently rests with the network guys. So if I had to say what I would do, it's identify them really early on and say, look, your Cisco certifications are incredibly valuable. but increasingly less relevant. Now it's time to talk about how you're going to help us get to the cloud era.
All right. So we talked. I mean, this has kind of been a meme, at least in the, let's call it the web infrastructure world for a while. Like finally, the network has become, and with software-defined networking, all these things, like that barrier is being broken down bit by bit. And so it sounds like, I mean, but in the cloud, it's still kind of there and a real thing.
And people in the audience may have a similar view, but it feels like the public cloud was embraced immediately by the developers because of its ubiquity and its ease of adoption. Then I think the sort of IT administrators and compute and storage-oriented people said this just makes a lot of sense, and obviously storage is now very mature in the extent to which there are cloud-based storage offerings. But it was networking that was the last bastion, and still remains actually the last bastion to really evolve their thinking and think, wow, it's about how I integrate with the cloud and how I allow this the data center to escape or allow cloud to escape from the confines of the data center.
So how far along is VMware in actually delivering, this sort of environment where, I mean, so if we're at 10% in some sort of private environment, and networking is still a problem, I mean, are you guys, can you legitimately say we can solve this problem without the systems integrators, or what's the state of affairs?
So we have a public cloud offering that's now live and mature in 5 or 6 markets, several thousands of clients, but the actual integration piece, I'd say by the end of 2015 is complete. It's taken nearly 3 years, but I'd say by that point we'll have integrated at the networking layer, the security layer, the management layer, and even then the service catalog as well. So, by no means do we say, we wish you'd done it quicker, but having done 3 years and with several thousand developers doing that, I think we've got a real appreciation for how difficult it is. So, what we've seen, I guess, for a decade or so is thousands of enterprises trying to do that integration themselves or using third-party systems integrators to try and do it themselves. And I think we've said, look, if we can create value here by pre-integrating a public cloud platform with their existing environment, then that creates value. It'll hopefully lower the drawbridge, improve adoption, and mean that the floodgates will open in terms of cloud. So hopefully that's an honest statement. It's taken us 3 years. We're finally there, and by this summer, fall, I'd say all the pieces will be there.
All right. And what's the? I mean, so it sounds like we're talking about with VMware customers at least. A lot of what you might call legacy workloads, or they're always trying to connect back to an existing application, existing infrastructure. Like, is there a plan for dealing with, how you deal with this next generation of applications that are going to start coming online? I mean, that people are building in Amazon today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're most focused on are the next generation of applications that need to connect back to systems of record in an existing environment or on premises or even in a private cloud. If it's a standalone next-gen app, and having just walked around here, there's probably a lot of next-gen apps out there that are never going to have to talk to legacy systems of record. But if they do, which is the majority of enterprise next-gen apps, then that's what we're really focused on. And we're focused in 2 areas. One is to create a container-based environment or a container-oriented environment that gives you very, very stable runtime, and that you can have the ability to, if you're creating an application and you're using container, be it, any one of Docker, Rocket, or even Garden, any one of the current container frameworks, that you're able to have complete portability. So you can bring that, you can be developing the app in a container in the cloud, and then potentially bringing it back on premises. So that's number one, trying to get it so you've got complete portability, and you don't end up with siloed bare metal resources that make you just as inefficient as you were back in the dark days of hardware and physical computing. The second thing we're very focused on is how you make that absolutely robust from a runtime perspective, so that it will absolutely run as reliably as your mission critical apps are running today in a virtualized environment.
Right. What does that say? I mean, so containers are an interesting thing in the sense that they're often positioned as, I wouldn't say the anti-virtual machine, but a very much kind of a different flavor of thing. I mean, what is it? I mean, VMware clearly built its business around virtual machines.
Yeah.
So what does the move toward containers say about the value of the VM going forward?
That's it. I mean, there's nothing new about the discussion around at what layer in the stack do you place most value. I think our view of it is, and our response actually has been twofold. One is we've actually created a new distribution of Linux. So we've created something called Photon, which is our own open source distribution of a very lightweight Linux layer that enables you to put containers on that layer, and it's been optimized for the virtualized stack, for our VMware stack. So the response has been to say, look, we can continue to add value because we can actually optimize the value you're getting from your underlying infrastructure by optimizing it for both containers and the underlying hypervisor. That was a pretty long-winded answer. I probably could have given a more succinct version of that.
All right, sounds good. You mentioned OpenStack, erroneously, but I wanted to talk about because that's this other big kind of huge point of discussion. If you follow the cloud computing space at all, it's like, whether OpenStack, right, at this point. Like, so what is the VMware stance positioning on OpenStack?
Yeah, exactly the same. I think, again, we created a distribution of our own variant of OpenStack, VIO as it's called, just a few months ago, announced it in February. And what we've done there is trying to find a number of our enterprise clients who've been running VMs for a long time, said, look, we love the benefits of OpenStack, but we're also now looking for a robust support model. So we're looking for somebody that can optimize OpenStack for the underlying hypervisor, but also provide robust levels of support, and we don't want to have to troubleshoot between the OpenStack layer and the hypervisor layer. So we see OpenStack as a really interesting cloud management platform layer. We'll continue to strive to be extremely compatible with it. As you know, we are seeing reasonable adoption of OpenStack amongst enterprises who are starting to build their own private clouds, certainly at scale. Perhaps mid-sized, smaller-sized companies, not so much. And we're seeing less adoption by the major cloud providers, but certainly enterprises building private clouds, we see a pretty big demand for it.
All right. So does OpenStack at some point, become the dominant management layer for VMware customers, at the expense of VMware software, or what's kind of the? Obviously have a distribution of it, but
sure. No, I think it's a very good question, and that I reckon is going to take 10 or 15 years to play out. Obviously, interestingly, in the public cloud marketplace, 2 or 3 of the major providers there have built entirely proprietary stacks as their cloud management platform layer. While VMware's approach has been, when we build a cloud management platform layer, let's make it available to our clients as well. So I think the law of the jungle will probably determine how that maps out. But the OpenStack project seems to be continuing to evolve, and we'll see where that gets to.
All right. So there's OpenStack, which is open source. You talked about Photon with this container runtime, which is open source. So VMware and open source haven't always been mentioned in the same sentence. Like, what does that say about the importance of open source in this day and age? Can you roll out a new product at this point without having some open source componentry to it?
That's right, and it's certainly the sort of corridors of the headquarters of VMware were creaking a bit when we announced our open source initiative around Photon and something else called Lightwave. It feels like certainly in this whole era of being heavily disrupted, I think containers seem to be the thing that's driving the disruption. It's probably fairly short-sighted to embark on launching a product in this space that would be entirely proprietary code. So it just seems fairly logical that you do something that is much more based on open source, for us it's a first. So VMware is going to, we've done a few in the past, but this is a fairly major initiative. So we're going to have to gain that muscle of how you build an ecosystem around open source code, make sure that contributors to it are adding value, and so that it grows and grows. So really interesting times for us. And obviously, you're working for a company that's been doing this for a while as well.
Yeah, certainly. Now, I was going to ask you. Is the open source challenge for a company like VMware more around adjusting to a new business model, which might be more support and services over software licenses, or is that actually building this community around the project so that it gets the momentum that you actually need to be a successful open source company?
Yeah, I think more the latter than the former. I think knowing how you strike a chord with developers, encourage them to contribute code, and then generate that flywheel effect is something that's going to be really interesting. Now, the good news is we have an installed base of 500,000 clients who've been using our technology a great deal. They're very interested and invested in making sure that they contribute to and make sure that the layers of code we develop on top of our stack continue to be interesting as well. I think, and so that's all interesting. One of the observations I think we're making is, for most of our clients, there are quite a few things hitting them at the same time. This evolution in the way applications are developed, the emergence of open source code. But the thing to keep your eye on is it's the transition to public cloud that dwarfs all the others. And you see many of them who'll say, I've got 5 priorities and it's how I react to these 5 things. My point of view, and I think a few others, is to say, look, the 4 of them are interesting. The one that is absolutely make or break for your company is your ability to embrace the cloud and convert your infrastructure and your application frameworks into something that's cloud ready. Everything else is noise. And the noise in this conference, the noise you hear everywhere else, it's so hard to just say, is that really true? Because, so much nonsense is being spoken around, cloud, that it's difficult to continue to convince people to say, look, literally, if you do nothing else in your era as a CIO, make sure you handle this transition to cloud effectively, because it will be not only the make or break of you, your organization, but the make or break of your company. So that's something that we become zealous about.
So after that, can I ask, do you have some examples of what customers are doing in the cloud? Some of your customers, I guess, are doing in the cloud that would, I think, if you could famously look at Netflix, for example, in the public cloud entirely and say, oh, wow, look at what they built using these cloud components, right? What are enterprise customers doing at this point? What types of applications are they running now that are fundamentally different because of the cloud?
Thank you. So let's just pick off a couple of verticals. I think entertainment, well known, fully being disrupted, over the top content, that's probably well known. Stuff that's probably less well known is, within the financial services business. So, the sort of the buy side there of creating trading algorithms or investment theses that are going to make people a lot of money has always been the reserve of the banks with enormous resources that can create algorithms and then have incredibly expensive infrastructures that they use to test the algorithm against past time series data. And obviously this today represents 55% of all trading volume in the equities markets and the derivatives. With cloud infrastructure, we're seeing incredibly small innovative startups come up with a concept and a trading strategy, and within a period of weeks have basically, because they've been able to use cloud infrastructure for 1/100th of the cost that one of the big sell-side banks had to do, will come up with a trading algorithm and will basically put that into the market and make more money in a period of weeks than the hedge funds were making. Just 5 years ago, hedge funds were having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to invest and create these innovative algorithms. So it's not the most wholesome story, but the capital markets are literally going through a whole revolution as the ability to develop and then test algorithms is going much faster. Certainly healthcare is the other big area of disruption, and this is one that's really happening. There's so many ways in which cloud is evolving in the healthcare vertical, but the one we see firsthand are the companies that have found that they can use cloud to rapidly speed up the test and development cycle for early stage drug trials. We have a couple of companies, one's called Nevro that's based in Silicon Valley, and they basically have taken a 7-year drug cycle and brought it down to 7 months. And they're now at the limit of what the regulatory authorities will let them do. So, we're seeing drug trials and the ability to quickly create environments to test concepts of drugs happen just incredibly quickly. And that's being very, very disruptive to the incumbent pharmaceutical companies. So that's interesting as well. What else? So perhaps the biggest, most interesting thing has been in the sports world, so professional sports around the world. In sports, which I didn't realize, the thing that determines how much money you make for all of the big sporting franchises here in the United States, in Europe and in Asia, it's all about the schedule. I promise I won't go on for too long. It's all about the schedule of which team plays which team in which market and who you sell the rights to. And that algorithm is incredibly complicated, trying to work out which night you schedule teams to play, who you sell the rights to over a 4-month season. And literally, all of the big major sports franchises have literally grid farms that embarrass banks. They have enormous farms of grid computing, and all they do is do that analysis. And so that's revolutionized all of the major sports franchises' ability to now come up with their schedules much, much quicker and optimizing them to potentially increase revenues by 20-30%. And we're talking about $6 billion of revenue a year from typical, the average television advertising revenue for a year. So an interesting one.
So it sounds like, Like again, it's less about, hey, you can get infrastructure faster, cheaper. I mean, that's like what that does is essentially is let you do these types of applications, do these new things.
That's it.
Just so much quicker. It's much less about the actual servers, right, and much more about what you can do, hopefully.
That's it.
Because of it. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to take in the last few minutes, I want to take a little detour and talk about. I mean, so last week, Amazon Web Services, announced its funding for its revenue for the first time, and it was, I forget the exact numbers, but it's on pace to like what, 15 billion or something this year. I mean, what does that say about the cloud computing as we look at this market? We used to be like, well, there's Amazon, but that's for developers, and then there's these enterprise clouds. But 15 billion, I mean, that's a lot of money. Like, what's the?
Yeah, no, I think Amazon were obviously transparent for the first time. I think they signaled. I think the CEO mentioned that it was a $5 billion run rate business, but clearly the growth rate was still accelerating. And then, of course, scrutiny came onto the other major players, certainly Microsoft, Google, and then, of course, VMware as a player in the public cloud, and IBM as well. I think the interesting thing for me is that's a really interesting snapshot into the first sort of 1 mile of a 26-mile marathon. The next 3 or 4 miles of the marathon are going to be the make or break, and it's going to get, I think, really, really interesting over the next. Why do I say it's really interesting? For this reason. I think the first 5% of workloads that moved into the public cloud were fairly unique, they were fairly easy, and they were actually the low-hanging fruit, and spectacularly well done to those that were able to capitalize on that opportunity. Now, actually, it sort of slightly defies logic, but if you've done extremely well in those first 5% of workloads, I don't think it actually qualifies you for the next 10% of workloads. It, of course, gives you a great running start, but actually the next 10% of workloads look a lot different radically different. And so, for me, the next 3 or 4 years, I wouldn't be surprised if the top 5 players are either some combination of the people we've heard of today, or people you've literally never heard of. So it's really exciting.
So what you're saying is, despite Google's best efforts and Microsoft's best efforts and VMware, IBM, anyone, like, it could be theoretically.
It could be theoretically, and there's some maths that's sort of proving that out as well. And obviously, I'm coming from VMware and been in the business a long time, and by goodness, we want to make sure we're one of those top 5. And I think hopefully we're doing everything we can to make sure we are relevant. But the chances of it being the same 5 are nearly nil. It will almost certainly be 3 of those 5 will be companies that are probably out there right now with a shill saying, we've got this good idea about how this might be an interesting new cloud product. So it's really interesting times, and the sort of rate of innovation is probably unprecedented. So yeah, interesting times.
I mean, so we have like 30 seconds left. So last question. I mean, if you had to predict, let's say, 10 years from now, right? I mean, we've seen VMware go from, some buying up the stuff that eventually became part of Pivotal, and then going back and then kind of taking it back in, and now going into this cloud native application space. Like, I mean, if you had to look out like 5 years or 10 years, what does VMware look like as a company? What's the business? Yeah,
I think 5 years out, I think we'll be an entirely cloud services business, just personally. So number one, I think we'll be entirely cloud services versus perpetual software. I think we'll probably have made that evolution, but that's just a point of view from the guy that runs that business within VMware. Don't hold me to that. The second, very quick point is, I think networking and network is the key thing, and I think that's going to be increasingly what companies have to really embrace and understand networking technology more than they have done previously.
All right, great. And with that, we're out of time. So thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Derrick.